Rundstedt would be forced to make what he termed fundamental decisions. As Speidel and Rommel motored back to La Roche-Guyon, Speidel attempted to draw his chief into the circle of conspirators, playing on the field marshal's troubled conscience over the stories of the death camps established in eastern Poland. Later that day, Rommel voiced his alarm to Army Group B's naval liaison officer, Admiral Ruger. Pacing the grounds of La Roche-Guyon after dinner, Rommel suggested to Ruger that the German army in the west should surrender. He hinted that the Nazi leadership had blood on their hands, adding, "I have always fought clean." Rommel then wrote to his wife Lucy, "It's time for politics to come into play." All the while, both Rommel and von Rundstedt were looking to the northeast for the anticipated arrival of Patton's first U.S. Army Group, one of the fictions of fortitude to which Speidel's compliant intelligence staff gave the utmost credence. It also seems that on his own initiative, Speidel was withholding a vital panzer division, 116th, from the Normandy front, calculating that it would be needed to deal with the SS garrison in Paris after Hitler had been removed. By the 15th of June, Rommel was sufficiently depressed by the overall situation in Normandy to compare it with the dark days of early November 1942, when he'd been forced to concede defeat at El Alamein. He demanded that a representative of the High Command come to Normandy to see for himself the odds against which his troops were fighting. He was in for a surprise. On the morning of the 17th of June, Hitler arrived in France to meet his generals. The Führer had divined that Rommel was in the same mood which had overtaken him before the retreat from El Alamein. The line of retreat from Normandy led straight to Berlin. Rommel, von Rundstedt and their respective staffs traveled to meet Hitler at his headquarters near Soissons. In this bunker complex, 300 miles from the fighting in Normandy, Rommel and von Rundstedt confronted the Führer. In the presence of Hitler, Rommel seemed to regain much of his old confidence. For the last time, the Führer cast his spell. He told Rommel that thousands of V-1 rockets were now raining down on a defenseless London, an exaggeration which seemed visibly to put a new spring in the Field Marshal's step. It would not last. On the 26th of June, the Americans broke through at Saint-Lô and began to seal off the Cotentin Peninsula. To the east, Montgomery was hammering away at Caen. Patton's phantom army group still haunted Speidel's staff. On the 27th of June, it warned that there were huge forces in southern England readied for an invasion in the Pas-de-Calais. In fact, there were only 12 divisions on the other side of the Channel, all of them destined for the fighting in Normandy. At the end of the month, Rommel joined the senior commanders in the West for a conference with Hitler at the Berghof, the Führer's mountain retreat in Bavaria. Rommel had told von Rundstedt that the war must be stopped now. I intend to make no bones about it when I see Hitler. At the Berghof, Rommel bravely attempted to confront Hitler with what he knew to be the truth. He told Hitler he could not leave the meeting without speaking on the subject of Germany. Hitler asked Rommel to leave the room immediately. The conference continued without Rommel. He was never to see Adolf Hitler again. Back in Normandy, Rommel received yet another visitor. Field Marshal Kluge, a veteran of the Eastern Front, had arrived to replace von Rundstedt at CNC West. Kluge knew of the plot against Hitler, but had kept his distance from it. Kluge and Rommel did not hit it off when they met. By now, Stulpnagel in Paris and Speidel at Rommel's headquarters were becoming increasingly desperate to win Rommel over. Once again, the persuasive Hoffacker was dispatched to La Roche-Guyon to draw Rommel into the circle of conspirators. The mission sealed the Field Marshal's fate. Hoffacker returned to Paris convinced that he had won Rommel over. Rommel, however, remained ignorant of the plan to kill Hitler, a move he would never have supported. But in Paris, Hoffacker told his Confederates that Rommel had placed himself entirely at their disposal. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Hoffacker then traveled to Berlin, where he met his cousin, Claus von Stauffenberg, the wounded veteran of the Eastern Front who had been chosen as Hitler's assassin. On the 16th of July, Stauffenberg informed the plotters that the field marshals in the West were with them. Haunted by the spectre of defeat in Normandy, Rommel was torn between lingering loyalty to Hitler and his duty as a professional soldier. On the 16th of July, Rommel delivered an ultimatum to Hitler in the form of a report to Kluge. Everywhere our troops are fighting heroically, but the unequal struggle is drawing to a close. In my view, the political consequences of this must be drawn. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army Group, I feel obliged to make myself plain. Time was running out for Rommel. The roads on which he drove 250 miles a day in his powerful staff car were regularly strafed by Allied fighters. On the ground, the team from the British Special Air Service, the SAS, were keeping a watch on La Roche-Guyon and awaiting the arrival of a hit squad to assassinate Rommel. One of the senior German officers in whom Rommel had confided was Sepp Dietrich, the commander of 1st SS Panzer Corps and one of Hitler's oldest associates. On the 17th of July, Rommel had asked Dietrich if he would always obey his, Rommel's, orders, even if they contradicted those of the Führer. Dietrich told Rommel that he would. Meanwhile, the bloody battle for Caen was moving towards its climax. Rommel's old adversary in the western desert, Montgomery, had finalized his plans for Operation Goodwood, an armored drive to smash through the stubborn defenders of Caen, which had defied Allied bombardment and attack for over 3 weeks. But Rommel was to play no further part in this battle. After the meeting with Sepp Dietrich, Rommel motored back to La Roche-Guyon. At 6 p.m., his staff car was attacked by 2 Spitfires. Rommel's driver was killed, and Rommel received serious head wounds. One of the Spitfire pilots caught their target with his gun camera. Rommel's luck had run out. The Allied air power he had feared had removed a vital piece from the Normandy chessboard. Rommel regained consciousness in the Luftwaffe hospital in Bernay on the 18th of July. The struggle for Caen had been his last battle. 2 days later, at Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia, von Stauffenberg placed a briefcase bomb under the table at which Adolf Hitler was holding his daily conference. The explosion ripped through the hut, killing 3 officers, but sparing Hitler. The next day, the Führer greeted the Italian dictator Mussolini at Rastenburg. The plot against Hitler had failed. In Berlin, troops loyal to Hitler moved quickly against the conspirators. Many of the ringleaders, including von Stauffenberg, were summarily executed. Others faced torture and then trial in Berlin before the People's Court, presided over by a fanatical Nazi, Roland Freisler. Freisler's personal reign of terror ended when he was killed in an air raid as he was about to open the trial of Fabian von Schlabrendorf. The brave von Schlabrendorf survived the war. In France, von Kluge, who had hung back from joining the conspiracy, was to commit suicide when relieved of his command and ordered back to Germany. Rommel, recovering from his wounds at home in Herlingen, also fell under suspicion. 2 days after the bomb exploded at Rastenburg, he had told Speidel from his hospital bed that the incident would have undreamt of repercussions. Dread spread through the conspirators. Summoned to Berlin, von Stulpnagel botched a suicide attempt. In his resulting delirium, he was heard murmuring Rommel's name. Hoffacker, who had been urged to flee, stayed put, and in an attempt to save his own skin, fingered Rommel. Hoffacker was hanged in December. Gestapo reports of the suicide attempts and subsequent interrogations were rushed to Hitler. On the 12th of August, Heinrich Himmler, chief of the SS, arrived to see the Führer. In his briefcase was a notepad on which was written, Item 6, West, Kluge and Rommel. The shadows were closing in on the Desert Fox. And on General Speidel, who was interrogated by the Gestapo and then, at the beginning of October, called before an army court of honor. Inevitably, the trial of Speidel was also the trial of his boss, Erwin Rommel. Speidel, the great survivor, wriggled free. Rommel, who had no friends at Hitler's court, was doomed. At Herrlingen, where he'd been convalescing since the 7th of August, Rommel knew that he'd been placed under constant surveillance by the Gestapo. On the 7th of October, Rommel received a summons to Berlin from General Keitel, Hitler's chief of staff. He declined, pleading poor health. Plans were already being made for Rommel's funeral. On the 13th of October, General Wilhelm Burgdorf, Hitler's senior adjutant, traveled to Herrlingen from Berlin. Burgdorf was accompanied by Major General Ernst Meissel, head of the legal section of the personnel branch of the German army. Burgdorf and Meissel arrived at Rommel's house at noon on the 14th of October. The Field Marshal received them in his Afrika Korps uniform. Before Rommel left with the two generals, he told Lucy and Manfred of his fate. He had been given the alternative of trial or suicide. He had chosen suicide. Death lay 200 yards down the road, a cyanide capsule in the back seat of Burgdorf's limousine. Hitler had many of the conspirators hanged on piano wire and then drooled over the film of their death agonies. Rommel, who had never contemplated Hitler's death, remained a hero to the German people and was given a funeral to match his status. Manfred, an auxiliary firefighter, paid his last respects with his mother. Before he drove off with Burgdorf and Meissel, Rommel had told Lucy that he did not fear trial and was innocent of any involvement in the plot to assassinate Hitler. But Rommel had been prepared to support the removal of Hitler as a preliminary to negotiating a surrender to the British and Americans. And he had openly discussed these plans with a number of people. Rommel knew only too well that this was an act of treason for which he would have to pay the ultimate price. Rommel never feared death. Its wings had brushed him many times. He was a patriot, and above all, the general in the sun.